Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Sub Club Live. So we've been doing this pretty much every Thursday this year, and have some great guests coming up the next few Thursdays. But we started doing these live shows because the podcast is great. Got some great guests on there, but you don't get to ask questions in a podcast. And we've been having a lot of fun on these live shows of bringing top experts from the industry on and letting you ask questions, letting you help steer the conversation. Typically, we do the Q&A afterward versus in line, but we've also had some really good questions come in line. So get ready with questions. If it's on topic, ask while we're discussing, because we are going to start with a kind of longer discussion of today, meta ads. And then hold your kind of off-topic questions to the end. We'll do a kind of open Q&A where you can just ask anything. Next week, we've got Daphne and Alice on to talk reactivation. That's going to be a good one. If you're not doing anything on reactivation, it can be some low-hanging fruit to recapture some revenue that you may be leaving on the table. The week after that is a really interesting one. Connor Bird won Ship-a-Ton last year, and part of how he won was that he partnered with a creator on his app. And so the creator did a lot of the promotion, and we are going to break down that creator partnership playbook for subscription apps. So that is going to be July 9th. And as always, it is 9 a.m. Pacific time, 1800 Central European time on Thursdays. And there will be a calendar. We'll drop the link in the chat and then have it in the description for later. You can subscribe to the calendar in addition to subscribing here on YouTube to see what's upcoming and be reminded to show up and get to ask questions. So today we have the one and only Marcus Burke. Super excited to, there we go. Tapped like 3 times and he didn't come on. Super excited to have Marcus on, the one and only, pretty much the world's foremost expert, I would say, on running meta ads for subscription apps. Super in demand as a consultant. Even if you want to hire Marcus and you have all the money in the world, you probably can't hire Marcus. He is booked up and busy, but that's part of why I love bringing folks like Marcus on the live show, is to give you a chance to ask him questions, even if you wouldn't be able to hire him to answer those questions. So Marcus, yeah, if you want to, I mean, I've already kind of hyped you a lot, but if you wanted to give a quick little intro of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Marcus. I run kind of a small consultancy focused on meta ads, but kind of to me that means going pretty deep on like funnel optimization, paywalls, pricing, like in order to like make that channel work. So I rather go very deep on one channel than working across all of them. Been doing that for the past three and a half years now. Worked at a couple of subscription apps before. Blinkist was one of them, which got me kind of into this whole thing. And I previously came from the gaming industry, so that's where I started running meta ads or Facebook ads back then in the first place with big budgets. And that was a pretty good kind of learning ground to really understand the channel deeply.
Yeah. Well, one quick question on the start. How much of what we discussed today will be more explicitly related to Instagram versus Facebook? Because they are two very different platforms, right? So when we say meta ads, it actually covers both. And now there are some WhatsApp ad, like there's more stuff that Facebook is doing in the audience network. But how much of this is more specific to Instagram these days?
I wouldn't say it's like specific to one or the other, while I deeply care about placements and about understanding like that meta in the end. Yeah, it's one channel, but you're reaching completely different audiences in completely different places, and you need to be aware and you need to, in the end, figure out how to serve where you want to be. And that's where I already see a lot of accounts fail. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's specific to one or the other, while usually the education needs to happen of how to get onto Facebook. Everyone is on Instagram because Instagram Reels is just kind of the biggest and most growing placement. So usually that's where people end up. And then I try to figure out and help them to get into Facebook as well, which is where some older people are with more money in the pocket. So that's always interesting.
Yeah, and we'll probably get into it in a little more detail in the conversation, but I did want to kick that off with that, because when we say meta ads masterclass, I think a lot of people just think Instagram, because like you said, that is the best performing and kind of the top place for subscription apps these days. Today we're going to do something a little different. I typically, a little more conversational, but there's so much for Marcus to share, so I want to do. I'll still interrupt and reframe things and things like that, but we're going to do a little bit of like a speed run because there's so much I wanted Marcus to cover today. And I thought it'd be just a great resource for the future. He has an upcoming blog post that's going to cover a lot of this. But to kind of get it in his own words and have a video out there that's kind of him speed running essentially the whole blog post, which is like what 39 pages long if you break it up into pages.
A bit over the top.
All right, so we kind of already broached the subject, but I wanted to kick it off with why meta ads still matter for subscription apps.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of always matter, right? But then with ATT, there was this period of a bit of a slump, and it got pretty hard to advertise profitably, which I feel like the whole app economy, but also Apple noticed and felt. In the end, Meta is just one of the main ways for people to discover apps. And besides to going to the App Store and like actively search, you need to kind of actively do so. You're in discovery mode on that channel, and it reaches a whole bunch of people across all their apps. They have close to 4 billion MAU, so half of the world population. And on top, they have a very strong algorithm just because of all the data they gathered, which people like or dislike. But ultimately, they did have Facebook login and a whole lot of products for the longest time. They did have kind of their Facebook login button on websites, and everyone is running the channel. So of course, their kind of in the end estimations of who's going to be a good customer for you are pretty strong, and hence people are seeing good results. So that combined makes it a pretty good channel for pretty much any product out there.
Yeah, and then it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but of all the platforms, they seem to have cracked fingerprinting. I'll just say what it is. Probabilistic attribution is the PC term in the industry, but they seem to have cracked probabilistic attribution at a level that nobody else has, and so that also aids in the performance. So it's not only do they have amazing data, not only do they have like 250 million people, but they're also like able to match events better, from what I understand. Am I right about that?
No, I mean, I don't have a kind of very good comparison right now how TikTok is doing these days or other channels. Generally, I would say they're doing a good job. Many would say they don't, because usually you see your conversion events in Ads Manager being much lower than what you see in your MMP and in your baseline. But that comes down to them not adding view through to their fingerprinting or probabilistic measurement. Yeah. So ultimately, a lot of traffic, especially from those video placements, short form video, full screen, are view through. People just watch a whole bunch of videos and then they go to the App Store afterwards to look them up. Especially younger users tend to have that behavior, and those just aren't tracked at all, just because Meta doesn't include them. I don't fully understand why. I think they ultimately would be able to. Hence, your numbers are always going to look deflated in the actual console, while I rather have them deflated than inflated, as you would see on like a Google Ads, where it's like, oh, like 4x what I would actually see on my baseline. Yeah. So I feel I'm not sure if they're necessarily so much better, but they're definitely fair when it comes to that, because the click is the highest intent signal in that case, and only matching those means you're at least not going to look at totally inflated performance. And I feel that's
good points. One of the quotes from the blog post I really like: Meta is easy to start, hard to master. What do you mean by that, and how do you get started?
I mean, they're trying to make it easier and easier, right? Like they kind of took away a lot of, or they generally don't take away controls, but of course they're adding in defaults, and there's always kind of a best practice setup that they're pushing onto you. So you can get a campaign live pretty easily these days by just clicking on next. Whether that's necessarily the best kind of setup, especially for a subscription ad, I guess we'll go into that later. But so it's easy to get started and like run some ads, while then, there is still all of these controls. They rarely take stuff away, so you can still really get into the nitty-gritty details of setting your targeting if you like to, and target interests or like any of their behavioral groups. You can still use custom audiences and lookalikes. You have a lot of data available, which I find is a very good, like a big benefit of the channel. It's not as much of a black box. You can break down anything you're doing against age groups, against gender, the placements you're running on. So you can get a pretty deep understanding of the traffic you're buying and the channel, like by digging in. but you need to spend that time, and it's going to take you a while to like in the end get there. But to me, that's why I like the channel, because I can actually dig in and find out stuff I wouldn't be able to on like a Google Ads or Apple Search Ads.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can speed run this, but the question always comes up like, what's the minimum spend I should
Of course.
have on Meta to like actually give it a real go?
Yeah. So, I mean, usually people quote the 10K. I think in the end, the things you need to think of when kind of starting ads is one, you need a media budget. And of course, that media budget, how much that needs to be, will be determined by the audience you're buying and how many conversions events you're basically trying to collect. So the ballpark is always like 50 a week. So if you can bring in conversions at $5 a piece, then you need less budget and the algorithm can learn efficiently. If you're like a premium app or some product with, in the end, premium pricing or poor conversion rates by the nature of it, then you might need more budget to make sense of it. And the other thing you want to think of is creative production. The whole channel, it's one of the few levers that really moves the needle these days. You need to be making creatives at scale, test a whole bunch of things, different formats, different messaging types. And of course, each of them, again, needs signal to first find their audience, and that can blow up budgets pretty quickly. So I would say 10K is rather on the lower end, really. So that means you have probably a trial-based product that can buy conversion events at like 10, $15, and then 10K is enough. If you're a product that is going to have conversion, like cost per conversion of like $50 plus, then rather, estimate like five times of that, if not more.
Yeah, makes sense. So on the topic of easy to start, hard to master, what is a job of someone running Meta ads in 2026? Because I know it's changed a lot over the what 12 plus years you've been doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I already said, like creative production is definitely one of the big things here. And in the end, building a system around that, which means, well, you got to figure out what type of creative you're going to be producing. Will you need kind of creators to work with? Are you going AI first? There's a lot of regulations coming up where you need to like mark AI creatives more transparently. So that's a bit of definitely of a risk, and we'll have to figure out like how to make that happen. And then in the end, like figuring out like all these messages and audiences that you're trying to go after. And oftentimes that's a kind of AI driven system these days where you're like in the end mining a whole lot of data to figure out what are all those subsegments I'm after within an audience that is relevant to us. And on the other side, then mapping different creative types against that and figuring out, well, how can we produce these at scale? Statics are pretty easy to make these days. Like you can go into like a ChatGPT image 2 or other image models, and then kind of even with one prompt and putting the text on top, like directly have images. So that's like big companies have automated that these days. While videos, of course, are, if you make them AI, they're still harder to make, and you need a kind of a bit more advanced skill set to do so. If you want to work with creators, then you need kind of creator communications. You need to find them, source them somewhere. And usually that's a big part of the job, kind of building that system in the early days until you like have traction and you are able to at least test like 25 ads a week and then kind of ramping it up. And on the other side is kind of in the end making sure that the channel runs smoothly. You're not necessarily in the ads manager as much, like just tweaking things, which was mainly the job like 10 years ago, where you like tried different targetings. You had a lot of ad groups, and always in the end we're testing new things, shutting things down, tweaked your bids. Most accounts these days are running on a much more consolidated setup. I still like to like set up different branches of ad sets, and we can talk a bit about that later, but ultimately it is a lot easier. Like you maybe spend a couple of minutes if you need to do tweaks, and you don't do it every day, but still you want to at any time kind of monitor like your traffic mix as you're running usually broadly across all those placements targeting 5 billion people. It's your job to figure out, well, did that change over time? Is it moving in the direction that I'd like it to? And how is that performing against our down funnel? And that definitely, I mean, also that is not necessarily something that takes a lot of time, but you kind of, again, need to build that system that allows you to do so. And then in order to scale, it's really then more of a strategy job of thinking about, okay, we have a stable mix, it's running smoothly. I have my eyes on Meta not breaking anything, and then you have to deal with breaks all the time, of course. And then it's like, well, how do I unlock the next best thing? Like, where are we not serving yet where we should be? Which creative would fit there? What needs to happen to my creative production pipeline to access that audience or that placement? Does my funnel need to change? A lot of the work, like I would say, most of my work these days is really in kind of app onboarding on the pricing and paywall, figuring out, well, we have some interesting signal from a certain audience. They're a bit younger. Do we actually have a price for them, or are we too high commitment at the prices we have right now? How can we find kind of a good balance? So I would say a lot of the work really was moved into the funnel and really coming up with, in the end, an onboarding and like a first-time user experience that benefits the channel.
Yeah. We had a good question come in, kind of a blend of our last topic and this topic. How does minimum spend relate to the number of creatives? And I'll reframe it a little bit as well of like, we talked about 10K as probably being the bare minimum, but maybe even 50K to really give meta ads a go. But when you're spending at that level and just getting started, how many creatives do you need to be producing to even make that work?
Yeah. Again, you can't really put like a strict number on it, because in the end, it all depends on how well your funnel is already converting with where you're at. And if you're able to drive conversion events at a reasonable price, let's say $10, then you can test some good volume already, because if you're running your creative tests, they don't need to necessarily reach 50 events a week. Like if they reach like 25 and you have them run for a week, you will have a pretty good understanding of like what's working, what's not. And ultimately then, of course, each creative test costs money, and you will have to figure out, well, how much am I willing to spend in order to find a creative that's working? When you're very early, I would also, in the end, try to determine, well, is creative really the lever that is going to make this work? So if you tested 10 very distinct things, let's say you come up with like 10 distinct concepts that have messaging for different like sub audiences of the people you're after. You tested a few different creative styles, some UGC, a few statics, some more like motion graphic animation videos. In the end, like these days with AI, you can go you can create some really cool, distinct stuff. So if you tested these 10 things, and then probably you have like 4 or 5 iterations within each. So when you test a new concept, always make a few similar ones. So keep the messaging the same, but test different styles, or like tweak the messaging a bit just to like give Meta a fair chance of picking like one of the 5. I would always test that like one ad set, so one concept in one ad set, so that Meta actually does deliver on them. If you throw everything in one ad set, they will pick one ad and say that's the one, and you don't get results on anything else, which is not. You don't get any learnings from this, right? While you want to have creative learnings, all of this is also for learning, like, who is my audience? How do I advertise my product? So you need to force it a bit. If you did that and you found something that looks reasonably well, but all of them are off by like, you're like at minus 90% ROAS, then it's like, well, maybe creative is right now not the lever yet, and you need to work on your funnel, on your App Store page, and then rather pause it down, look into kind of how did that traffic behave down funnel, and like where do I think is my biggest bottleneck right now? Because not everything can be solved through media buying, and that's why a lot of my work happens in onboarding as well. And therefore it's always going to be expensive to buy traffic. You can build your product a little bit more, like it's not as expensive. I mean, if you have engineers and stuff, there's payroll, but ultimately, yeah, make sure you figure out what's the breaking point right now and don't optimize the wrong thing.
Yeah. We had a good question come in related to that. What's the typical percentage increase in install to paid conversion after Meta's learning phase is complete? So, and maybe, I mean, this is going to vary per app, and this is why you spend a lot of time in paywalls and onboarding and things like that. But do you see that like once the learning really gets dialed in, like, can you expect to drop from $40 an event to $20 an event, or what does that typically look like when you know something's like really working?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like you're not going to see the biggest shift after the learning phase finishes. Usually you see the biggest shift in the first few days when the first events are rolling in, but then Meta is pretty good at dialing in that audience pretty quickly. So when you launch a creative test, there's usually at least going to be one day of like bad performance, then it gets better, and then it gets even better. But from day 3 or so, you will already see kind of your cost per event flatline a bit. And then once you reach 50 events, that's just ensures that it can like run a little more stably against that goal. But I wouldn't expect massive performance fluctuations afterwards anymore. At least not that like it magically gets better. It's always going to go up and down, and there's always going to be something where you're like, oh my God, yesterday was terrible. Should I shut everything off? But the learning phase is not going to fix it. Like if after 3 days you're still 50% away from goal, then likely that creative is not going to get there.
Yeah. We have a lot of good questions coming in. Some of them a little off topic, so I'll hold those for later. But I did want to kind of wrap up on creative because we've been talking a ton about creative, and again, the kind of phrase you use in the blog post is creative is the new targeting. Anything else on creative to kind of round out the creative topic, and then I want to move on to signal engineering next because that's kind of a fun one and one of the big levers to pull on.
So, I mean, creative targeting is like something everyone has heard for a few years now. Like what I always try to educate my clients about is kind of like what that in the end means and how it becomes actionable. Because I mean, it's kind of clear to everyone, like you put something out, and if you kind of say mom on the first screen and there's like someone with a child, then you're going to end up targeting moms, which is like, okay, I get that. But in the end, Meta has so much data to support this and to like help you understand how to scale it. And like one of the most important ones for me is always the placement level breakdowns, and on top the age level breakdowns. And like if you make it a habit to always look at them and to cross-reference, you will first understand, well, which placements are bringing which audience. For example, Instagram Reels being a very young placement, Facebook feed being a very old placement. And the other thing is that you want to, as soon as you found something, like let's say in your creative testing, like you found that one kind of tagline, that one story that is converting well for you, then it's going to be very hard to scale just by finding new stories over and over and over. The main thing for you to scale will be using that story and bringing it to everywhere that you can put it, like bring it into the different placements, figure out how you can bring that story to younger and older people if it's relevant for both. Of course, at times some messages only make sense for younger ones, but if it's kind of a universal story that feels like, okay, this just in the end is in a very short time span educates the user about what my app does, then you want to figure out how to bring that everywhere onto all the tastes by making it into different styles, all the placements, all the age groups. And that's in the end a much easier way to scale because you've proven that this converts. And now it's the matter of figuring out how to actually distribute it well. So the job isn't done when you found this works, but you're actually going to start heavily iterating on it. And as soon as you have something that works, like 80% of your creative testing, of your production should be focused on iterations. And you're always going to do net new stuff at like 20%, maybe 30, to figure out like new things, because one story is also going to fatigue at some point. There's fatigue on any level, on a creative, on a full story. But in the end, you really want to kind of milk that one thing and figure out how you can bring it everywhere. So again, like use those breakdowns and all the data that Meta gives you in order to see, well, kind of, we have this one story, it's working, it's now delivering, let's say on these placements, it's on a UGC video, so it's heavily delivered on Instagram Reels, Facebook Reels. Well, check your previous creatives. Like, was there another creative that delivered a lot on Facebook feed or on Instagram stories? What did that creative look like? Can you come up with an hypothesis of why it delivered there? And how can you apply that hypothesis to the story that you know works? And so it's really, in the end, building that understanding of these placements and then kind of coming up with, in the end, not every creative test can have a strong hypothesis. You're testing so much, you're not kind of going to write tickets and write down like what you're doing, why. But like the more you look into breakdown data, the more you will find these patterns where it's like, well, if we use this hook, we always end up in this place. Let's make sure we put it on everything that's working so we actually can go in that place. And that's to me kind of the secret of like in the end how to scale an account even when you have just one thing that's working. And it's not about always making kind of a magical new interesting ad. That's just not sustainable. You will find them every now and then, but it's really, really hard to find like a completely new style or a completely new message. So it's really built on iterations, which can look boring, but it just makes a whole lot of sense from like a testing and data perspective.
Yeah. Related to that, what do you suggest when Meta allocates all the spend to one creative out of X after spending very low on other ones? Do we trust Meta's algorithm or do we try and force spend on other ones?
I force spend a lot. I mean, you have to
And you
trust
do that
them.
by pulling it out into a different ad set.
Yeah, that as well as using value rules. Let's talk about
Mm.
both. First of all, like from a campaign architecture perspective, again, if you always look into, well, which ads deliver where and like which ads seem to be favorited by Meta, you will get an understanding of, well, this type of ad always gets all my budget just because it's often based on very upper funnel signals. So Meta loves engagement. More engagement means a higher quality score just because that's what they can easily track on the platform. That signals them it's a quality piece of content in the end. And that's also their goal, of course. Like they want to keep people on their feet. They don't just want to show them stuff that is boring. So oftentimes delivery is driven by that a lot, which can be kind of inverse to your business goal in the end. Sometimes you're going to have like ads that are very clicky that drive a lot of engagement, but they don't turn into results at all, and still Meta will deliver them a lot. One classic example here is memes. Memes always get a ton of engagement because they're deliberately broad. They're made to like in the end get engagement from people, but they don't necessarily transport your brand message all that well. So once you throw them into a campaign with stuff that's working, they suck up all the spend and your CPA skyrockets. I've seen it over and over, which doesn't mean you can't run them at all, but they should be run in a separate ad set and they likely need a different goal where you kind of restrict them a bit just so that they don't take over. And that's the way that I think about it. So whenever I see a pattern where Meta delivers in a way that just doesn't make sense from a business perspective, I think about, well, do I have enough event volume to pull out another ad set? Will that one get enough? So 50 events a week. And can I force spend that way? Otherwise, the algorithm just can't take perfect decisions for you, especially not when you're optimizing for a trial, which is not money in the bank. It's just a trial. Yeah. So you need to kind of guide it a bit. And the other way I'm doing that is, well, value rules. It's kind of the good segue to the next topic. It's kind of the simplest form of signal engineering, where you Meta released it or maybe half a year ago by now. It used to be available only through the API as bit multipliers, so you had to get whitelisted. It was pretty hard if you don't have an account manager. But now it's in the UI directly on ad set level, and basically you can, on any of the targeting layers or most of them, you can say, I want to run broadly. I'm targeting everyone, but age group 18 to 24 is worth 40% less for me because I know they always convert less. You can do that on placement level. You can do that on a location level, meaning you can consolidate a lot more, for example, across countries, across age groups, across genders, but then basically in the algorithm already tell it, okay, but like consider that this one isn't as valuable to me, and therefore push it a bit into one direction or the other. And usually with these two, you can go fairly far without having to even think about sending back values or qualitative trials, just because optimizing for your trial with that additional data point encoded is fairly sufficient for what you're doing in the beginning. So when you're like at 100K a month, then don't worry about signal engineering and like sending the next crazy event. Like figure out creative testing and like give a little more context through the AI, but you should be able to get to 500K without going like super deep into like all that data stuff and signal.
Gotcha. I do want to dig deeper into signal engineering for folks who are at that level, but we had a good kind of logistics question come in on the topic we were just discussing. How do you move the ad from one ad set to another without losing engagement history or data history for Instagram? Do you actually just like delete the other ones to keep that in the same ad set, or how do you structure that to not lose the learnings it did have?
I mean, you don't need to like delete an ad. Ultimately, you can have the same ad running in multiple ad sets. It's not like you ever compete against yourself or it's gonna like break anything. So like if things are running profitably within my creative testing ad set, so ultimately I test in a separate creative testing campaign or ad set. And I usually do that on a weekly cycle. So once a week we have a new creative batch and then analyze the last one and see how it went. If that stuff is running well, then I'm not going to pause it down. It's like, well, it's delivering results. I'm making money. Why would I? So I rather directly scale it in the creative testing ad set a bit, which already gives me a chance to also build more history and see, well, if we want to try like spending 2-3x on this, do results hold up, or were they only performant in that very small test ad set test budget, which isn't necessarily then translatable into spending a lot more on it. But of course, as soon as you see that your business as usual ad sets are struggling, then you want to find a way to bring that over, because if you find a new winning ad, then it should be running also at high scale in your business as usual ad set. What you have to consider is that when you move creatives between campaigns, they're always going to lose their history. Even if you use that little toggle in an ads manager that tells you keep engagement, it won't. And they don't tell you, which I don't understand. But then if you actually go into the ad and check it on Instagram and Facebook, you'll see there is no engagement on it, which is very counterintuitive. I don't know why they do it that way. So ultimately, in order to keep the engagement, there's a few ways you can have your creative testing ad sets within your BAU campaign, meaning when you duplicate them over, then you're not leaving the campaign, you're doing it within the campaign, and then it works, which is a bit hard on ad promotion because you only have 5 maximum ad sets in a campaign and you will be at capacity quickly. If you're running on web campaigns and that web redirect scheme where you still send people to the app store through like a web campaign, then it's easier because I don't even know what the limit is on a web campaign. It's a lot more for sure, like 100 or so. The other way would be that you use post ID to copy. So ultimately you can go into the original ad, into the URL, and it has a little ID. And when you set up the fresh one, then you can basically say, don't duplicate or don't take a new asset, but take this ID. And that will ensure it actually uses the social proof from previously and the ad level learning. There's tools like if you do it through the API or tools like Ad Manage, then they actually have like a toggle for that, which allows you to do that a little more easily if you duplicate stuff over. And the other way is, which is a bit like a workaround, if you duplicate an ad set from one campaign to the other, then the social proof of the ads within that ad set actually doesn't get deleted. So if you copy the creative over, it does. If you copy the full ad set over, it doesn't. So ultimately, you could take your full test ad set, duplicate it over into your BAU campaign, and then within the BAU campaign, move that creative into the actual ad set, which of course is like a headache, and it's not how you're going to scale an account. But in the early days, if you don't have the money to for an API solution for Ad Manage, if you kind of get sick of looking up the post ID, that could be another way. But ultimately, at scale, you usually want to you do that through the API to keep it on a post ID level, which is the only thing that's going to be sustainable.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dig deeper into signal engineering then. So it's the first time I've heard someone say you probably shouldn't even bother with signal engineering until you hit like 100K a month in spend. But once you do and start scaling up bigger, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say don't bother. I think it can always be a lever. While to me, it's like if you're not able to spend 100K profitably on the channel, then something else is off. Like your kind of creative isn't there. Your marketing doesn't work in a way yet that it's going to be scalable. Then it's like, well, maybe you do signal engineering and then you get from 80 to 100, but then the next cap is there. And then again, you need to figure out the bigger lever. So that's why I usually rather layer it on once it's the account has matured a bit and we know what we're doing. We have a few distinct creative angles and are able to spend some more money. While there is some stuff you can do in the early days. So one is value rules, which is a form of signal engineering. The other one is playing with your attribution windows. In the end, Meta will let you decide on an ad set level how much of the signal you're sending they should take into consideration. And so you have the choice of 1-day click versus 7-day click on ad promotion. While if you run on web campaigns, you even have the choice of adding engaged view or view through, which in the end means if you go kind of fully take everything, then it's 7-day click and view through, which means they're going to look at all the signal. While if you go only 1-day click, they're only going to look at kind of the highest intent stuff where people click through and directly make a purchase or start a trial. And doing so can already shift the needle. So for many accounts, oftentimes we start on something that is a bit more broad and we either have 7-day click if people even convert that long. I mean, for most apps, all of this stuff happens in onboarding anyways. But if that happens, then we might start there and even have kind of engaged view in there, which means someone has not just viewed the ad, but they commented on it or had some interaction with it. So that means we have a little lower intent signal in there, but since we're at a low signal anyways, we want to. And then over time, oftentimes I actually see 1-day click performing better just because it goes after those people that click, take an action, and they're kind of sold. So that's a form of signal engineering that I tend to do even earlier accounts just to figure out, well, what's the attribution window we should be on. Value rules is the other one. And then as you scale, so I definitely think that an account needs to be kind of the basis of an account should be running on app event optimization. So in the end, that means it's running on a single event you're sending and not any values attached to it. Reason being, when you move to value optimization, so you're sending PLTVs or like anything else that you came up with, then you're going to use a different campaign type again, or a different algorithm, which is their value optimization one. And that one is, from my experience, harder to scale. It's a lot more volatile, as it not only looks at event volume, but also like the variance of it. And then like it's just a whole lot more complicated. So I see that as something you add on as kind of a marginal gain. Maybe you can spend 30, 40%, but in the end, your basis should be running on app event optimization. And oftentimes what people start exploring then is those like qualified trials or like deeper funnel events, moving away from just the trial. I haven't seen like massive results from using the common one of, hey, we're going to delay the trial by 4 hours and going to exclude the people that aren't active on the trial anymore. Usually you lose a lot of events and then results are only marginally better, and oftentimes then maybe campaign for performance is up a few percentage points, but it never was a huge unlock for me. So I think if you want to really get into like a qualified trial definition, you need to just go a bit beyond. And oftentimes the definitions that are really working are just not something that you look up in Mixpanel where it's like, hey, I'm gonna only send for these people, or I'm gonna take away this one signal and then I'm only left with the best ones. So if you want to get into that, then I would definitely consider looking into companies that are specialized in this. And there's like 3 major ones that people work with, which are Day30, Journey, and Voyantis. There are different scales, different pricing. You will have to see what fits you. But ultimately, yeah, in the end, what they do is they use machine learning to create an event that's based on a like much broader scope of like user and device identifiers. And then ultimately, no kind of event is the same. They're always kind of determining, well, do we have someone here that is high intent? Should we fire for them? Should we not? They set a threshold and how much kind of you want to reduce your event volume. And that's, to me, where it gets interesting, and people, like from what I hear, are seeing good results. Actually, I haven't had a test case with them, but that's what I hear. To me, the other form of signal engineering is really thinking about, well, what is the offer I'm making people, and like basically what is my onboarding designed like? And oftentimes, for example, an issue of low trial conversion is, well, you're creating this paywall, which mainly has your yearly skew on it because you want quick payback. And you're forcing basically everyone into that on a 7-day trial, meaning any user that comes in, no matter if they're older or younger, what their intent is, will take that trial because they want to test the product. They downloaded it, like they made the effort. So they're like, well, okay, you're making it seem like this is the only choice, so I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to pay. And you can, of course, think about, well, how can you create a more balanced kind of offering that tailors to these audiences? If you're actually trying to if you're actually bringing in younger users with less purchase power, then it's like, well, what's the kind of offer they could actually take so that you're not actually pushing them into that plan? That might be a weekly, that might be just a lower price plan in general, but kind of trying to figure out how can we create an offer that in the end filters these people in a meaningful way so that you're in the end not left with kind of just one conversion, which then has a poor trial conversion because there's a lot of people in there that never wanted to convert in the first place. So I think it's as much of a kind of product task as much as it is of like a data science task and like then sending the right thing back to the platform.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll ask my own question here. Although we have some good ones in the chat, I will follow up on. How effective have App Store product pages been in making that more effective? So if you have an ad set that is doing really well with younger users, are you sending them to a specific App Store product page? And then is the fact that they landed on that specific product page reliably showing up in the app where you can customize the onboarding knowing that they hit that product page?
Yeah. So I do use custom product pages. I don't necessarily do it on like a demographic, but rather on like a messaging angle layer where it's like, hey, if we have 2 distinct creative buckets and they're going after different audiences with different pain points, we'll then make sure that your product page actually talks to them. So in the early days, usually I would have only the default one, and we're trying to make sure that it's kind of a catch-all where we kind of have different pain points in there that we address so that we can reliably test. But as soon as a few ones emerge, then it's like, well, let's actually spin them out into custom product pages, and that will help you to lift your install rate. It's never been massive for me, but I mean, it's for every ad you're going to make in that bucket, so it makes sense. It's reasonably low effort, so why not? One caveat here is that it's only going to work for click-through traffic. As soon as someone goes to the App Store and looks up your a brand, then they're on the default one again, which is also a big difference again on age groups. So usually older people click through, especially when you run like a static ad on like a Facebook feed. No one sees a static ad and then goes to the App Store and like looks it up. You see a video and that evokes kind of some kind of emotion. You do so. So view through on statics is pretty much non-existent. So there it works more reliably. On videos, less so. And when it comes to then also linking your onboarding to it, there it works even less unreliable, because first you have that view through and then you have the deferred deep link that needs to function, and there you kick out the next bucket of users. So I would say maybe, I don't know, if you're lucky, like 40% of the traffic that you're trying to link through that flow is going to see the right onboarding. Hence, I don't bother. Like I don't set it up this way. If I think about branching onboarding, then I would do so on first-party inputs in onboarding that you can reliably use. While I haven't seen a lot of people doing so. Like oftentimes there's so much optimization still to be done on the one flow there is. Not a lot of advertisers I worked with went into then, okay, let's start branching out another onboarding that we need to keep up with, that we need to test on, which is a lot of overhead. But then I also mainly work with like smaller stage brands. So like, yeah, kind of sub 1 million in spend, I would say, 10 million ARR, maybe something like that. So there's still so much wins to be made on the default version that you don't yet start branching out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Disappointing to hear though, because it seems like it should be a better solution. Are the events coming through reliably? Like in your experience, does it seem like 100% of the people who click and land on a product page, that does show up inside the app that they came from that product page, or is that even unreliable?
Also, that is unreliable.
Okay.
And there's a number of technical reasons for it, which I don't have top of my mind. But like, yeah, you will have a whole lot of loss for view through, and then you will have a whole lot of other loss due to kind of the mechanics behind that. Yeah. So in the end, yeah, it's not.
It's probably like the App Store analytics, where people who've opted out of the data collection, which Apple defaults to off in onboarding, when you first are like setting up iOS 27 or whatever. It probably has to do with that. It's like those people aren't, and so then that makes sense, because like I mean, in my apps, it can be up to like 60% of people don't have that tracking enabled, and so they're probably doing it based on that. Yeah. Had a good one come in. Does coupling meta ads with RevenueCat web funnel address ATT limitations? So this is kind of on the signal engineering. Is adding that web hop effective enough at getting better, more deterministic signal back, or is it really not worth doing?
So I'm not sure whether they're talking about like sending people to a web quiz or just through that, like a web link, which still redirects to the
I guess talk about both, because they did specifically say funnel, but I was also thinking about the hop.
Yeah. So generally on a web quiz, I see attribution functioning quite well. Like oftentimes in the end, you're going to be purchasing on the web. There is going to be a clear confirmation page that you can put a pixel on, which doesn't fire super reliably, but a lot better than anything you have on mobile. And you do also then send events back through copy. So as soon as you have recorded like a Stripe conversion, then you send that back. So I often see that being quite reliable. While anything that happens within a mobile app just is going to be unreliable no matter how you set it up. So in the end, like it's whether you run like app promotion campaigns or whether you do that web redirect setup where you in the end your MMP or someone like AppStack in the end uses a deferred deep link into the app and then tries to record those users through fingerprinting on their end. So again, it's fingerprinting, hence it's not going to be reliable. Like there's always going to be a mismatch. And at times you are going to see more events from this kind of setup than from app promotion. Sometimes I've seen it the other way around. It's always up for testing, but there is no way that you can just get to 100% attribution on Ads Manager. That's not going to happen. But that was also the case pre-AGT. Like ultimately, people had opted out of IDFAs before, and just people didn't think of it as much, and then it became a topic. So ultimately, you will always have to look what's happening against your baseline, against your where did you hear about a survey, and cross-check a number of sources to then identify how good is that channel actually working for me. And as I said, on Meta, usually it's underreporting. So something like a discrepancy of like 40-50% is pretty common. I wouldn't just kind of put like double your results, but kind of try to find some data that in the end allows you to make that assumption, and then you can use kind of multipliers on top of the results you're driving.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, and I think I've not fully understood how non-deterministic the web is now, because most of what we're talking about is iPhone traffic, and Apple on Safari, if they're in a private browser, if they have iCloud Relay turned on, like Apple is actively trying to thwart tracking even on the web. So like, I think a lot of people assume, oh, if it goes to the web, it's 100% trackable, but that's just not the case, which is, again, I mean, it is what it is. I'm aligned on the idea of privacy, but as an app operator, it's frustrating that everything is so non-deterministic these days.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, so anything, like any link you click within a Meta app is going to open within their browser. So like the Safari thing isn't as much of a problem. But then, yeah, kind of anything you're tracking on a mobile app is going to be fingerprinting, and you're basically, they're gathering a whole bunch of identifiers and trying to figure out, do we see a similar combination on our end? Does that match? And sometimes that works better for some apps when you do it through a web setup. Sometimes it's even better on app promotion. One thing to be aware of when you do so, like I see a lot of people like testing that web redirect scheme right now. There's no real name for it yet. I call it web redirect. It used to be like mini landing pages where you even had like a page in between people had to click through, but it's enhanced app campaigns through AppStack. Maybe that's going to be the brand that is going to stick with it. But ultimately, kind of both function completely different also from an attribution perspective on Meta. So when you compare them, make sure you compare them the right way. On Meta, first of all, different attribution windows are available to you when you use a web campaign and an app campaign. So your app campaign is going to default to click-based, and you don't have view-through. On a web campaign, you're going to have view-through enabled by default. So if you then just look at Ads Manager, that means, well, the web campaign can track all of that view-through, which can be 40% of the traffic, which means it inherently has an advantage by kind of the means of what's tracked in Ads Manager. On the other hand, in an MMP, it's the other way around. So since Meta has re-enabled their advanced mobile measurement, in an MMP, you can track click and view-through for app promotion campaigns, but there is no view-through on these enhanced app campaigns because basically the URL you're putting into Meta doesn't have view tracking enabled. So ultimately, it's kind of inverse where you check, and then you need to kind of piece it together to figure out what's actually working better. Don't just look at one source again and saying, oh, in Ads Manager, like we have 40% cheaper results on these enhanced app campaigns, because ultimately, if they run on a different attribution window, it's not comparable.
Yeah, totally. Gosh, we have like 7 more topics. We've kind of touched on each of the other topics, at least tangentially, that I wanted to cover. So let's jump to the biggest mistakes you see in trying to make it a Meta, and then we'll just go to questions, because we've had so many good questions come in. So yeah, what are the top like 4 or 5 mistakes you see that people can learn from and avoid?
Yeah. So I mean, definitely it's still very common to, like, in the end, optimize just for a trial and believe the machine is going to do the job. And that's definitely something that's the biggest challenge for subscription app operators that do rely on trial, because ultimately the whole business model demand, at least if you don't have like cash flow from other apps, then the business model demands you to push people into a 12-month so you can recollect that money. On the other hand, then you add a trial on top just to lower the friction to get into it, and then anyone takes that trial and not everyone wants to convert, so you end up with a very messy signal. And that's usually what you have to deal with in the early days and work around with value rules, with trying to figure out, hey, what types of messaging in the end drive a quality user and not just cheap trials. So you really can't rely on the machine doing a great job just because it doesn't get the signal to do so. Like, it doesn't have context. It doesn't know who's converting. It only looks at what's a cheap trial, and that's not necessarily a good trial. So that's the biggest challenge and still the biggest mistake that I see people making, that they let Meta do the job that they need to be doing at that point. Some other ones are, I mean, moving even more upper funnel in events. I still see some people like trying to run like install optimized campaigns or stuff. Like, and the more you choose a like poor conversion signal, the more you're gonna get of that kind of traffic. And ultimately, the traffic that converts is very competitive. Everyone is bidding for it on their app event optimized campaigns, on their value optimized campaigns. So the traffic that is left over and is cheap to get a cheap install from is the traffic that doesn't convert. And that's what you're going to get if you only optimize for installs. I haven't seen a case where an install optimized campaigns got anywhere near the performance of a deeper funnel event in the last, I don't know, 8 years or something. So I wouldn't recommend to do so. I also wouldn't recommend to test your creatives against it. Maybe that's a good other mistake. In the end, what that means is you're testing your creatives against an audience that is completely different. It's different people that care about different stuff, and you're only trying to get them to a cheap install. And then that doesn't necessarily port to your trial campaigns or other events. So in the end, make sure you're testing in a relevant bucket so that also your wins are portable to your business as usual campaigns. It's always a bit of a like balancing things out. Of course, you also want to test cheaply. I get that. Like, if you test only in the US against your real goal in an old audience, then testing is very expensive. So then it's always the question, well, how can we remain in a relevant audience while bringing down prices? And you could think about, well, let's move to Canada, often like 50% cheaper in CPMs, very close to a US audience. Might be a good way to test. Some brands that are like really high velocity testing, they move into even tier 3 markets like Philippines, Indonesia are usually quite interesting. In the end, I would urge you to, like, when you move your testing to a different place or a different pricing or a different algorithm, then in the end, you want to measure whether that stuff still maps to what you're doing. So when you found some winners on that new setup, try to bring them over, see if they actually win, and whether kind of that match rate degrades with the new setup or not. Don't just kind of move everything over and suddenly you're basically recording the wrong results. That can create quite the mismatch there. Yeah, what else?
There was a good one we had here in the notes, over relying on one creative style, like generic UGC.
Yeah, true. That's a good one. As said before, in the end, the creative styles you're using are determining the placements you end up on, and UGCs are just made for these Reels placements. It's always going to deliver mainly on Instagram Reels and a little bit on Facebook Reels. If your ads or like if your app already has kind of an older topic, I worked with like a sleep app before. Of course, sleep is rather relevant to older people. It's not much of a problem when you're like 20. Then the topic can determine placement as well, just because older people are on Facebook, and then maybe you see more deliver on Facebook feed. But generally, UGC goes on Reels. And that means if you only do UGC, you never tested a different placement. Maybe your conversion would be 50% better if you ran on Instagram feed. You just don't know. So ultimately, like, make a lot of diverse creatives, especially early on, so that you're not working in a local maxima where it's like, oh, I need to do UGC because it's the content type on socials and you're kind of, everyone is doing it. Oftentimes people look out for like D2C advertisers who only do UGC, but it's not the case for apps necessarily. So test diversely early on to figure out, well, where do I see the best traction? And then you need to focus a bit, of course, because otherwise, like, you can't be making creatives in a ton of styles all the time, but at least do some broad testing early on to figure out, like, what does my performance look like in these different placements? And then again, that testing can inform your, like, how to grow the account once you found your working message. And once it's like, okay, we have something that is profitable or even kind of making us a good return, then you can go back to that and figure out, oh, look at this, kind of my statics delivered in this place. Let's put that message on a static and see if we can get the same behavior with the message we now know is converting. That's why it's so important. And the other mistake with it is, for me, kind of over consolidating the account and letting Meta in the end highly concentrate your spend. So oftentimes they will end up spending 90% of budget on like 2 ads in an ad set, no matter how many you put in. And that means if you put in all of them, then that means you're going to run with 2 ads. And since creative is targeting, that means you're only targeting that audience which is behind that creative. And that's niche. Like, just because you're targeting broad doesn't mean you're actually reaching a broad audience. It means you have to kind of make sure you do. And that's where, to me, kind of using your architecture comes in, and you're basically pulling creatives out, putting them in their own ad set so they actually get a chance to spend, so that you're more diversified, meaning you're able to scale, and also things won't be as volatile. Because as soon as your hero ad dies in an ad set at 90% of the spend, then you're in trouble. You're not if you have like 6 ad sets and they all have their hero ad.
Yeah, makes sense. Back to UGC for just a sec.
Yep.
This question came in to go a little deeper. Should I get my creators to focus on making UGC style videos for virality, then take viral ones and use them as ads, or add nearly all the content to the ads every week and get Meta to pick the best? Yeah, what are your thoughts? Like, because I know this is such a tricky subject, because sometimes things that go viral don't promote. And we actually talked about this on the live stream last week. Is with Noise, I had a creative that a creator built on their platform, went super viral, got like 5 million views, and like did not convert.
Yeah.
So I guess that's part of the answer, is like make sure the viral ads are actually converting. But how do you think about the balance and like how to measure the conversion of virality, and what messaging, or how to translate a viral thing into something that actually performs better as an ad?
Yeah.
Because we're all really tricky things to balance.
So, I mean, ultimately, virality always has to be very broad. Otherwise, it's not viral. Like, I mean, you can go viral in a niche, but then it's not really viral. It's still like very limited reach. So ultimately, all that kind of content built for like a TikTok to get millions of views is quite generic. It's trying to, in the end, appeal to a very broad audience, so you can get to that view count. And an ad has to be a lot more targeted. Since creative is targeting, if an ad is not targeted, then you don't know which, like the algorithm doesn't know which audience it should be reaching. And it's a little similar to kind of the meme example I gave. If you create something that just everyone engages with and everyone is like, oh, this looks cool, well, that's not necessarily your target audience. And that's something to always be aware of when trying to use like viral content in your ads. While it is still very interesting to like look into that and see like what are those mechanics that are driving virality, and how can I maybe pair them with something that is more targeted. So, I mean, we have a lot of, like, when we make ads, there's quite a few ones where we are able to achieve like super high hook rates. Like usually I think like at least the D2C advertisers always say like 30% is like the norm you should be aiming for, otherwise it sucks. We have creators with like hook rates of 80% plus, because we're creating these like viral moments that we take from organic social that are just very interesting. But then we very, very quickly get to saying, hey, this is an app and this is what it does, and we're selling something. It's not like viral throughout, just like an interesting story, because otherwise the algorithm is going to go after everyone, and everyone is not your target audience, and you're paying for it. That's the thing, right? On organic social, you want all these views because they're free, and once you find something that works, you want it to go as big as possible. That's not your goal on paid social. You want kind of impressions to go into the audiences that are relevant to you. Otherwise, you're paying for a whole lot of impressions that don't matter. So it's a tricky one. And then again, also it comes as a challenge in terms of account management, because again, like the more viral something is, the more Facebook will want to push it, because they're like, oh, this looks amazing. It's high quality content. And so it will eat your budgets no matter whether it converts or not. So when you kind of experiment with this, make sure to put it in its own bucket. Don't throw it into your BAU campaigns where it just kills the spend on everything else. And then you figure out, oh, actually it didn't convert.
Last topic I wanted to touch on, and from here on out, we'll just take questions. My view of the chat, I don't get to like flag things, and it's a big jumbled mess. So if you asked a question earlier that I did not answer, that wasn't answered in our conversation, just start posting all your questions. And at this point in the show, like we'll answer anything. So AMA for both me and Marcus of anything you have questions on. So start posting those in while I ask Marcus one last question, and then we'll get to those Q&As. So on the biggest mistakes in our notes, one of the things was treating the account as a one-time setup as a instead of as a learning system. And you mentioned that as one of the biggest mistakes you see. And so I wanted you to get a chance to dig a little deeper into what you mean by that.
Yeah. I think people can get a bit into their head about like the perfect structure, and they read stuff I put out, and they listen to stuff other people put out, and then it's like, oh, someone said this is the perfect account structure, and so that's how I'm gonna run it. And that very rarely works out. Like I always strive, like I have an idea for what will work and like which buckets I'm trying to build and why this exists, but that changes on an ongoing basis. Like, and I hate it. I would love to have like the perfect structure and it's all clean. I have my naming conventions, and then in the end I just need a quick glimpse at the account and know what's going on. But that's rarely how it goes, just because the algorithm acts in its own ways. It has its quirks. So don't be afraid to like move away from the structure you have, like migrate things over, have things on 3 different structures at one time, because that's how it's going right now. As long as you always kind of keep a good overview of, okay, like I again discovered kind of an algorithm quirk and I have kind of a way to counteract, well then kind of keep doing that. And there is always so much to test. Things evolve. It's different on different apps. As soon as there's a new creative, then that brings in different signals. So yeah, don't be afraid to move away from anything I'm telling you, and don't be afraid to move away from stuff other people are telling you, because it's going to be different for every product. It's going to change over time, and it's just never going to be perfect. It's always a mess. It's a mess in my accounts. It's going to be a mess in your account. Get used to it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. All right, we had 3 good questions come in so far. Keep the questions coming. I know, Marcus, it's really hot there. You're in
No,
Germany, and you're in a record heat wave. So give me the signal when you're ready to wrap it up. Otherwise, we'll just keep taking questions.
sounds good.
So
I
let's
can
at
take
least
it
get
too.
through these first 3. All right, how do you organize creative testing frameworks in a Google Sheet with angles, hooks, creators? How do you track?
Yeah. So we usually organize kind of the production on like a Kanban tool, usually in Notion. That's easiest for me. And then in terms of the results, like we tend to look at them on like a weekly basis when the results are in. And then based on that, we brief in iterations or anything that is like, okay, this looks to be, well, we found something that has a good hold rate. We had something that has a good hook rate. Let's combine them together. So we take like quick actions, while any pattern that emerges gets kind of marked on like some kind of learnings bank. Again, it can be just a Notion page. Sometimes even like we do a lot of ideation on like a FigJam. So we put in like a box which is like, okay, we think these 4 things are always true, or we found them to be working over and over. Let's make sure we consider them when making new ads. I'm not a big fan of like trying to create these like massive spreadsheets where you even like input metrics and try to track all this stuff, because it's gonna become irrelevant very quickly. I mean, like the channel moves on, so I mean, in the end, it's social media, right? There's like trends emerging, stuff happens, and then like your onboarding emerges, so like conversion emerges. In the end, it's going to be very hard to look back in 2 months saying, oh, look at this creative, like we wanted to do something with it and we have written down its click rate and everything. So I'm not a big fan of that, or like at least I found that usually the effort isn't worth it. And especially now with kind of AI, like, and then the Meta MCP, you can ultimately have like a one-time analysis always saying, hey Claude, kind of go back the last 3 months, cross-check all these patterns, like give it kind of the main metrics you care about, and have it do like a thorough analysis of stuff you might have missed in your production in case you hit like a wall with production. I think that's always interesting, just to get like this additional input on what the AI thinks it can do. So definitely I would say, like, yeah, don't over engineer what you're tracking, but make sure you're building a system that is in the end AI accessible. I think as with anything these days, you want to make sure that data exists in a way that you can also use AI with it. We're just trying to get there. I'm a messy worker myself, and messy is not great for AI. But for example, with like these Kanban boards and how things are tracked in Notion, I'm trying to make sure now that I have like a daily run schedule that takes the concepts that I write with my creative strategists and marks them down in a database, one line by creative and its ID. And then that's the database that a Meta Ads MCP can check performance against. and tell us, hey, I can read all the hooks because they're in Notion. I have the names on each individual iteration and can check in Meta what performed and what hook rate, what hold rate. And in the end, then just has a lot more context and can give a lot better advice of saying, hey, I found this pattern that we probably haven't even looked at, or kind of this copywriting techniques that always seems to work. So yeah, make sure you're kind of ready to leverage that and don't just kind of use AI in each and every step of like always dumping some data into Claude or some user reviews, write some copy, and then it kind of dies and you go to the next chat. Kind of try to kind of start building a system around it, which in the end, yeah, it helps a lot. In the end, you can catch everything, especially as creative production grows, and having AI kind of cross scan with you, that's just super powerful.
Yeah, we'll have to do a whole live stream. I don't know if you want to come back on or we get somebody else, but like building an AI system for creative and UGC, I think would be a great topic. Like I've actually got a Hermes agent set up and want to like experiment more with my own UGC for the app I vibe coded. And so I'm going to have the Hermes agent constantly like looking at performance and like checking in on things and looking. There's a new MCP that can look at like what's going viral, and then filter it against like your topics and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with AI these days, and building, systems around it is super smart. I think we're all still experimenting and learning, but that'd be a cool show in the future. And then speaking of topics that we need to get to and have somebody on, a perennial question we get constantly is around AppStack. I just got approved for AppStack today. Does enhanced app campaigns change your approach with creative testing or optimizations on Meta? I will get Lucas on a live stream because we just I feel like every live stream now we're getting questions about AppStack. It's like the hot company right now in performance ads.
Good job, Lucas.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily change anything in terms of your like testing or like the events you're sending. So you're still gonna, in the end, either pass back your app event to purchase, subscribe, or start trial. So pick a meaningful one. Don't map your kind of conversion against something like a registration or so, because oftentimes in the end there's pre-training on all of these events. So if you optimize for a complete registration, Meta will use the pre-training from all the people sending data to complete a registration. Of course, that's a lot less relevant than the stuff they receive on like a purchase or subscribe or start trial in the end. So kind of map it to a relevant event. And AppStack has just enabled that you can also use standard events. I have one project running on AppStack, and so they used to only offer custom events up until now. They now also use the standard events. Can be worth a test. I was actually surprised to see that stuff even works on a custom event early on. So the account was relatively small, and like my understanding was always, well, on a custom event, in the end, you don't use any pre-training, meaning you're starting from scratch, and Meta, just based on your data, has to figure out the audience, which feels like in a fresh account, of course, means you're going to have a cold start problem where they don't know what they're doing. But they figured it out pretty well. So even on a custom event, it worked well. But I have, since they launched those standard event mapping, I have went back to like mapping things against the actual purchase, just because it does make sense to me to kind of leverage the pre-training.
Yeah.
But other than that, nothing really changes. Pay attention to your attribution windows. Like in the end, you have view through as an option, and you want to figure out, one, do you want to leverage it? And if you want to compare against app promotion, if you have that set up already, then only look at click-through results. One little tip there, even if you run on, let's say, 70-click one-day view, which is the default, you can go into that. I think it's under the columns breakdown, drop down, and there is a field in there which is like compare attribution windows. So you can at any time compare your results against any of the attribution windows, no matter which one you picked, and that can be very telling. Just so that even, let's say you ran on click and view, and then your app promotion campaigns only ran on click, you can still compare both only on a click basis to get a better read on performance.
Yeah. Great little tip there. We had so many good questions coming in. Here's a good one. How long should you run creative ad set experiments for? What's a good benchmark? And is it a time basis, or would it be a budget basis or a signal basis? Like how do you determine when to turn off the learning?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of all in a sense. So ultimately, of course, you want to pick one that fits your production schedule, and the quicker you can produce, the better. So usually for me, it's like on a weekly basis. And then you can kind of, if you say, hey, that's what I strive for anyways, then you can work backwards from setting that time frame and saying then, well, ultimately, like, how many events do I want to reach to have at least some idea of what's working? It doesn't need to exit learning phase, but of course you want at least, I don't know, like 20 events on an ad to like know there is some significance to like the cost per event achieved. And then based on that, you can figure out your budget you need to set, because it's like, well, we buy cost per events at $30. Testing might be a bit more expensive, so let's make sure we have some wiggle room, and then put your budget on top. So yeah, to me, it's more of a like operational decision that I make, where it's like, how quickly can we produce, and how quickly do we want to produce, so that we have ongoing testing. And like weekly cadence, I would say, is some like a it's hard to achieve for many already. Like it's quite if you want to make 25 ads a week, it's not easy. But like very scaled advertisers, they make a lot each week, or they even have like ongoing testing where they launch stuff like each and every day. So like oftentimes like they have like 500 ads a week that they put live, or it's even hundreds every day on the very big accounts. So that's kind of what you're getting yourself into. So yeah, think about like how you can get there, in a sense. Of course, you're not going to get there like very early, but in the end, creative production at scale is definitely part of making this work.
Yeah, totally. How many more questions are you up for? We've got a ton of good ones, but we can't just go all day. So maybe 2 or 3 more questions.
Yeah, we can do like, 3 is fine. We can do until like half like 50 more minutes.
Oh, okay. All right,
we can
cool.
survive that long.
All
But
right.
it's getting hot.
Yeah. I thought this was a really great one. At what ROAS would you take as a signal of underspending? I mean, it's such a counterintuitive thing, but like, yeah, you could be getting a crazy like 3 times ROAS, but maybe that's like
Yeah.
a signal you could like scale it up so much faster, and like and it's so like business dependent as well. Like how much money are you willing to leave on the table? How fast do you grow? But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So kind of on app promotion campaigns, the thing that people strive for, like the first milestone is always just getting to profitability on first purchase. Like that's the gold standard. And that means, well, you can now spend some money against this and you can start improving the funnel, and you have traffic to do so. And it's hard to get there. And then kind of the advertisers that figure this out on an app promotion campaign and pushing people into like a yearly plan so they can collect money quite quickly, they may be optimized for something like a 10 to 50% profit on that first purchase. If you can make 50% profit on first purchase, then you're great at this. And if you can do so at scale, then you're very good. So that's kind of the range that people look for. This is not something that you're going to get rich on that first purchase. And I've talked to a few kind of smaller developers before that always felt like, hey, I'm running this at, a few $100 a day. I'm reaching a two ROAS, but it feels too low for me. Like I want to be at a 5 before I start scaling, because I want to make money. And then I'm always like, well, that's not going to happen. Like in the app business, like it gets interesting, like when you can retain and then things compound. And as soon as those like renewals come in, then of course that's where things get a lot easier. But on that first purchase, you're not going to get rich. And ultimately, rather try to scale while making sure you're staying within profitability. And then the business comes from renewals and from, at some point, then word of mouth, you ranking on the App Store when you kind of put some serious scale behind this. But that first purchase is always just going to be a tiny profit. So if you reach anything beyond 2, then you likely should be spending a little more money, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and it depends on, again, your kind of, what kind of business you're trying to build and how your retention is. The example I always use, because it's an app I've talked to a lot of times over the years, they were spending $1 million a month barely profitably, like just barely breaking even. But when you spend $1 million in June of 2026 and you break even and you have just like median retention, which this app had, it's like 30%. I think it's 28, but I think they had somewhere around 25 to 30. That's $250,000 to $300,000 of free cash flow in June 2027. So if you think, I need to make all this money, I need to make hay while the sun's shining, I've got a 2x ROAS, It just depends. If you can push that and spend more and more and more, and typically the more you spend, the lower the ROAS is going to
Yeah.
be. That's just the way it works. But if you push it down to 1.25, but you can spend a million, just be thinking about like what that means for your business. The compounding you kept talking about, like when you actually do the math on the compounding, it's crazy. And then the crazy thing too is like, this app specifically has been doing this for like 6 years now. And so the second year renewals are even better than the first year renewals. So if they, churn 70% the first year, they may only churn like 40 or even 30% the next year. And if that curve flattens out, then over years, you just start building this incredible business. And that's what like really great subscription apps are doing. And so that's what you're sacrificing by taking more profit today versus like spending more and getting a lower ROAS today. If you can afford it and you have decent retention, that's like the magic of subscription apps.
Yeah. You're definitely playing the long game there, which means you need a retentive product that delivers value in the first place. And like a lot of kind of those new apps pushing into the store that are vibe coded, they're like,
Yeah.
they want to make that money early because they know people aren't going to stick around once they see what's behind the paywall. But that's not how you can build a subscription app business. Like you're
Yeah.
not going to make a whole lot of money on that first purchase. And yeah, some like big player. I know a lot of big players that even like they buy unprofitably on first purchase, even like wasting a lot. Well, like not wasting, but they are taking a big loss on the first purchase because they know, well, it's fine. Like by month 9, I'm going to be profitable, and like by month 24, I'm going to have made 60%, and that's kind of something I can do at scale and make a lot of money.
Yeah, and actually, perfect segue to the next question. When you say profitable, do you mean day one, day three, day seven, i.e., when the trial ends profitable, or LTV is likely to make you profitable, i.e., what is a scalable return on $1 spend at the end of a trial?
Yeah. So that's kind of the like having made $1 from $1 by the end of your trial is where you want to get before you really start scaling, at least as a new business. If you have a lot of cash in the bank and well, we can wait for 2 years, well, then your goals are different. But usually that's what people are looking for, like smaller stage developers, that they make $1 with $1 after that trial period. And that, of course, should be $1 in like proceeds after taxes and paying Apple. Like, don't just look at like revenue, and don't look at LTV. Like, don't try to estimate what my like year 2 conversion rate is going to be before you make money. That's just not going to work for you. So yeah, that's kind of the time frame that I look at. And then it is definitely interesting to map out how that progresses over time. And like some apps have quite some lag even early on, so that even from day 7 to day 14, you already see like another 10 percentage point lift in ROAS. And of course, if you want to be a bit more aggressive, you can then say, well, it's fine if we take like a $10 hit on that first purchase. We know it's going to come in the week after, which means then you can just put some more money into the machine. And as that stuff starts renewing, then you're going to start making money on it. But yeah, kind of look at cash flow in the end and like stuff coming back into the bank quickly. You still have to wait for Apple to pay you, which is already quite the period. I know RevenueCat can kind of advance that against a generous fee. So yeah, that's kind of the ROAS that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And do it cohorted. That's the other important thing. That's one of the mistakes I also sometimes still see, where it's like people just look at kind of the overall revenue made in a month against the overall ad spend in a month, which is like, well, the revenue in that month will be coming from all those cohorts you acquired before. Like there's people converting late, there's people renewing. So ultimately, you want to look at how much revenue have the new cohorts you purchased driven. So always look at cohorted from that month in that month to actually access that day 7, day 8 ROAS rather than just overall.
Yeah. And similar to your example earlier of apps that are scaling fast and willing to take a sub 1-to-1 return on ad spend immediately. I've talked to a few apps over the years, and I think this is a rarer situation, but if you have amazing organic traffic and you're just profitably making a bunch of money, that's a time when you can say the most, because what are you going to do with the money? So like if you're making 100,000, I mean, it's a good problem to have, right? But if you're like free cash flowing 100K a month and you put that in in the stock market, pay taxes on it and everything else, or put that 100K back in. And so this person was choosing to put that 100K back into ads. they weren't profitable on year one, but were profitable or were anticipating profitability on year two. But for them, it was just like, I can get more, even if I only have, 20% retention in year two, or if I have year one 20% retention, like I'm making like 20% of my money. That's way better than I'm going to get investing in the stock market or whatever. So good problem to have, but it's so context dependent on like, but I think to Marcus's point, you should always be very, very, very careful and really understand what you're doing if you're not going to get that, like a known reasonable return on ad spend within a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, it's super restrictive if you want to make that money back so quickly, which, I mean, it really pushes you down that lane of, well, you need people in a 12-month to create that cash flow. You need your ads to function like well to get there. And of course, that means it's going to be tough. And the more money you have in the bank, the leaner you can be on that perspective. Also, when it comes to letting people into other plans, like pushing everyone into the 12-month plan creates a lot of that issue with the trial. And it's also very limiting in terms of the audience you're going to convert, just because that's not for everyone. Not everyone wants to be on a 12-month subscription. Not everyone even has that planning horizon. When I'm like 20, I don't think about like a subscription I'm still not going to have in a year. So if you have that money in the bank, then you can also think about, well, can that allow me to offer people some other stuff like shorter term plans? We know they're going to take a while to make us money, but ultimately we have that cash sitting there anyways. So yeah. But understand what you're buying, like get good at the analytics of it. Don't kind of just put it out there and eyeball it.
Yeah, and many fewer people have that problem of too much cash sitting around. All right, here's another good one. In setting a cost per result goal, is setting a cost per result goal still a best practice once you have a performing creative?
So I still use bid caps, cost caps at times, and I do see them working. But they're very hard to make work, especially on these app promotion campaigns. I think it comes down to like signal already being so scarce, and then you're putting another restriction on top. So oftentimes on the cost caps, the campaigns die down pretty quickly. So kind of you just go a little bit over the top, restrict it too much, and then delivery's dead, and you can't get it back up. To get them to work or to test them properly, you need to first build a bit of a history on that ad set and the creatives in it. Because ultimately, if you tell Meta, hey, I want to reach a $10 cost per goal, and they don't have any conversion history, well, then they can't even start delivering because they don't know how well it's going to convert, and they rather just don't because they say, well, we don't know if this is reachable. So ultimately, run stuff on maximize volume first, create a bit of a history, and then move things over to cost cap to give this a shot. And then also start with a non-restrictive cap. Like oftentimes I go in at like 4x, 5x even of my historic CPA of that campaign. And then I bring it down from there step by step until I see, well, yesterday my daily budget or my weekly budget, however I set it, like it decreased, or I didn't spend as much as before anymore. And that was as a result of me reducing the bid. And then you actually know, well, right now the bid is actually having an effect. And then you can start playing around of seeing, well, am I actually able to increase efficiency by bidding more strictly? It is interesting, especially when you're like cash constrained and you like have very tight efficiency goals. Then it does make your life easier at times, but not all the time. It's harder to manage, and it's definitely hard to scale. So that's why a lot of advertisers don't use it. What happens if you maximize volume? I mean, in the end, there's still going to be a bid kind of on max volume, because ultimately Meta says, well, you give me a daily budget or lifetime budget, and we're aiming to spend that full budget in that time frame, meaning we're going to set the bid in a way that allows us to do so. So ultimately, your budget control is your combined bid and budget control. And when you put the budget down, you bid less aggressively because it's easier to get to that spend level. When you move it up, it means you're bidding up. And that's where usually it gets tricky, because since they're one thing, you see good performance, you want to start scaling up, they're bidding more, and suddenly it gets too expensive. And that's where kind of that combined, like if you split it out, it can be very beautiful, because you can set very high budgets. You then set the goals that make sense for you. And then whenever Meta is able to buy traffic for that price, at times they are spending the full budget, at times they're not spending it, but they're always doing it in the most efficient manner. And if it works like that, then it's great, but it's very hard to get it there.
Yeah. Had another fun one come in. How much can we trust Meta AI / Marketing Pro? They're always suggesting to spend more and get a better result. Let me reframe this a little bit, maybe to make it a little easier for you to answer and not throw any Meta folks under the bus. If you do have a Meta contact, or if you are using the Meta AI, what are the things that are kind of most helpful in using either talking to a person or using the AI? And then, I
Yeah.
mean, feel free to rant if you want to.
I never use the Meta AI, and I guess it could be helpful on stuff like understanding documentation. I mean, it always, like, if you're on any Meta website, I think double click on something or mark something, it comes up now that they say, hey, do you want to analyze this with like the Meta AI? So in that case, I think it can be interesting. Just like I think RevenueCat, you also have this thing, and I use it at times when I'm trying to understand like how certain charts behave or like why something is like that. I wouldn't use it to take campaign optimization decisions. I wouldn't trust it for that. But also, I haven't tried. I don't know. Maybe it's trained on great data. I don't know. When it comes to the marketing pros, I mean, there's like two levels of support you can get. One is a marketing pro, and one is an actual account manager. And like when you get an account manager, that's great. That usually means you're spending big enough budgets on a consistent basis, and you're important enough for Meta to like have one-on-one support for you, which has the kind of the goals for that have moved up and up and up. So like most of the accounts I have never seen an account manager, just because there's like, I think in the end only the really premium ones spending big amount of money get them. But through them you usually have access to like beta features. They have just more insightful stuff to tell you based off like competitor analysis and stuff. It's not gonna make or break things, but at least it has some value, especially if stuff breaks. Like when you have like when it feels like, oh, was this a bug or is this on our end? Then usually those are the people that can tell you, yeah, it's not fully confirmed, but we see this across other accounts. And then it's like, well, okay, I don't need, or at least I don't need to look for like a technical error on my setup. I still have to act, but at least it's not me that like broke something. The marketing pros are an external sales team. Like they aren't marketing people. Like they have an agenda of what they're trying to sell based on what Meta wants to push, and that's what they're doing, and they're getting commission on getting you to do that. And that's why they're saying spend more, use all of our latest AI features, and then they earn more when you actually opt into that stuff. And I definitely wouldn't trust them. I've heard of some cases where people had like, I often get approached by people on LinkedIn who are like, my account got blocked, I don't understand why, I can't reach out to anyone because support never comes back to me. There I actually heard of some cases which were like, hey, I went through a marketing pro who had contacted me before, and they were actually able to do something, which was great to hear. But other than that, I very rarely heard that a marketing pro in the end gave any meaningful input that would have improved something.
Yeah, great answer. And you went a little deeper than I wasn't sure how deep you wanted to go on that one. All right, I think this is a good place to wrap up. Sorry to those of you who didn't get your question answered. There was just so many good questions, but I thought this was a good place to wrap up. We have a great CPI, CPR, but people don't start trials. We have tested onboarding, but we can't seem to have people to initiate the trial. What would you suggest? And I'll frame this a little more broadly, because there was a good question earlier we didn't get to around like how much should we be testing onboarding? How much should we be testing paywall? So when things aren't working, what do you do? And how much, I mean, is it just the product sometimes? Can onboarding fix it? Like, it's tough. So how do you think about these things?
Kind of a chicken egg problem usually, where it's like, okay, like, are we buying the wrong audience for the product we have, or is the product just not there yet? And then you have to kind of pick one. Ultimately, like, if you say we have great CPI, I directly hear, well, you're buying cheap traffic. So definitely have an understanding of like, look into your breakdown results, like how young are these users? Are they cheap because they are young? And also, like, what's the messaging and on your ads? Like, are you actually selling something, or are you making content? Because when you're just making content, you usually have pretty great upper funnel stats. Like, if it's just like a fun video that feels like a viral video, then you might get people up until install, but then the funnel just breaks because you haven't sold them anything in the ad and they come in with the wrong intent. So make sure, like, take a bet on whether you're already driving the right audience. And if it looks like the right audience, like you made it clear in the content you're putting out there that this is what it does. We're an app. We're not necessarily going to sell you something, but we're going to solve something for you. Then people should be coming in with like a certain intent. And if they're old enough, they should also have purchase power. And if that's all the case, then, and your funnel still doesn't convert to trial, even then I would start thinking about, well, what does that funnel look like? And like I said, a lot of the work is in onboarding, and onboarding is a big lever, because in the end, Meta is a very distinct channel. Like, people come in, they have a like tiny attention span. They just saw like 3 seconds of your ad. They maybe read the tagline on your first screenshot. That's about it. They're like super uninformed. They're just like, hey, I'm going to download and I'm going to check in the product, what it is. So ultimately, you want to build for that audience. Your onboarding shouldn't start on like a feature list and directly talking about you and what you're doing. Like, you want to welcome that audience and first really make them problem aware, make sure they understand, okay, I'm here and I feel like there is something to solve, and then kind of nurture them towards being willing to pay. So oftentimes start a lot earlier than with like talking about your features and stuff. Start talking about the user and like welcoming them into this and showing them that they need something in the first place. And then make sure that the offer you have in your paywall is a fit for the audience you're bringing in. And that comes down to a lot is pricing, but also then kind of, are you leveraging pricing psychology in a meaningful way? Like, do you have the right commitment offers for these people? Do you have the right pricing for your category? I mean, you could also just be very overpriced for something that people perceive as not being valuable enough. And then either you need to explain to them why it's so valuable, or you need to lower the price. So there's a lot to be done here, and that's usually the majority of my work, that thinking about, well, which audience are we bringing in right now and how do we convert them? But then also, as soon as you want to move into new audiences, these mechanics shift. Like, how educated are they at this point? Do we need to have a lot of education onboarding to get them to understand what the product can actually do? Like, how credible do we seem? Are we a big household name yet, or are we very fresh and have 100 ratings on the App Store? Then probably you should try to be a little more convincing in onboarding. So a lot to do there. But yeah, first of all, figure out, do you think it's an audience problem? Are you buying the wrong traffic, or is the onboarding kind of not up to the standard for these people? And then kind of pick one that you want to focus on at this point.
Let me put my own theory out there, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Marcus. I don't think every app will work, and maybe even I would say most apps won't work for meta ads. And I think there's a few reasons why, and I'll use the example. I vibe coded an app. I meant to only like spend a week on it, but I had so much fun. I ended up spending 2 weeks and making it much nicer than I initially intended. But it was like this habit tracker for character. It's like a whole new, like, I mean, nobody's heard of this before. It's something I like got an idea from my kids years ago. And when I was thinking about like just a fun app to vibe code, like I'd always wanted to turn that into an app for myself to use and them to use. But it's like people aren't like gonna spend $60 a year for a habit tracker for character. Like, it's a fun app. It's fun for me to get out there. I didn't have high expectations of it. But it's like that kind of app, like I would never expect, and I only price it at $25 a year, and then I have discounts all the way down to $15 a year, and I just have zero expectations that I would ever be able to spend against that app and make a return on spend. Like the level of convincing, the level of value people see in it, the conversion, the retention, like I just have zero expectations of ever being able to spend against that app. And I think some of the things that it takes to succeed on meta ads is you really need to have something that people like understand and are willing to pay for. That's why health and fitness apps generally do so well with meta ads and scaling on meta ads, is because people are willing to spend for their health. And there's, we've talked about this on the podcast for years. There's high comps in the space. Like you're spending $60 a session for a trainer. You're spending $60 a month for a gym membership. You're spending, hundreds or even thousands of dollars a year on like health and wellness stuff. And so people are willing to spend in that category, and they're willing to spend a lot. Like Ladder charges $130 a year or $30 a month. And it's like, that's part of how they make it work. So, and any other kind of closing thoughts on like why certain apps just are never going to work, or like what kind of filters to be thinking about? Like maybe it is just the problem with the app. It's not the audience. It's not the funnel. It's not the paywall. Like you're just not going to be able to make meta ads work.
Yeah. I mean, just quickly, one note on kind of the setup there. Also, of course, like optimize for that paywall event. So if you're optimizing for installs, then that's also the results I would expect there, that all those install and registration metrics look great and no one purchases, because again, you're buying the wrong audience. So optimize for the event you're looking for. But in terms of like vertical and the app you need, definitely there is like certain types of apps that just have it a lot easier here. So usually when you have like a strong visual activation moment, which is like easy to showcase in a video, and you kind of directly are able to create that link from like a video ad to this is what's going to happen in first session, like that's where things tend to work quite well, because it's just easily understood. Okay, this looks cool, I get it in the app, I understand why it needs to be an app. It's also like an interesting one to think about. So in the end, if it's just yeah, if the feature looks like something, hey, this is cool to do with my phone, then people will just download at a much higher rate. While a lot of apps, like in the end, it comes back to this being a discovery channel, and you're like, you're seeing those ads when you're like on the train somewhere, on your way to work, you're chilling on the couch at times or elsewhere. It's like, well, you're in that state of procrastination, of doom scrolling, and like, will you make an effort to then like try to take that decision, like that life-changing decision of like, I'm gonna now go for my dream body, or I'm gonna do this. And there's just a few desires which are easy to sell that way. Like fitness is one. Yeah, like if you sell it well, then you're always gonna be able to tap into that desire, because everyone wants to kind of look good and feel healthy. But a few other ones are just naturally going to be very hard to sell. Like if you're like a VPN app, like if I'm on my couch doom scrolling, then I'm not thinking about needing a VPN. Like I will think about it when I need it, but then I use search. I'm not going to go on Meta, look scrolling for a VPN app. So there are these topics that are just going to be very, very tough. And definitely like that's something like you want to be thinking about when you're making products. Like how can I, in my category, create this moment? Like how can I make it visual and cool to showcase to someone that is in the end in entertainment mode? They're not in problem solving mode. They're just watching cat videos and funny stuff, and you want to present them with something that looks just cool and something that looks low friction to like check out. And that's how apps, like I worked with Cal last year, like they were one of the first to have that AI food scanner, and it looks cool in the ad. It looked cool on also organic social. People get to it in the first session, and it creates this nice link, and people know what they're here for. They want to get there. It's magical, and that will make your life a whole lot easier for sure. And like looking for these apps that are strong on organic social is always good inspiration. Like I think they are doing a lot right, and they are like really creating some novel experiences around onboarding, because I think of organic social as being kind of the harder part of paid social, because ultimately you're bringing in this very low intent young audience that is just like people from those viral clips, and getting them to convert is much harder than getting a targeted person, older person against a conversion event to convert. So if they're able to do so, then there's something to learn there. So I study these quite a bit these days, and there's some cool stuff happening in that space for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, such great advice. Well, thank you so much, Marcus, for joining. I hear you starting to fade. I genuinely cannot imagine what it's like being inside a room that's like 95 degrees, like 30 something Celsius. So I genuinely appreciate your your willingness to do this and to stick around for so long. And a few things as we wrap up. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. There's going to be a link in the show notes, but also here in the chat to subscribe to the calendar. So the calendar can remind you on a weekly basis and also tell you what's upcoming. So next week we have Daphne Tideman and Alice Muir on reactivation and win-back strategies. Again, very similar format. We're going to answer questions and whatnot. And that's it. Thank you so much and thank you for all the great questions. Like this was a super engaged chat. So thank you, Marcus, for sticking around, and thank you, audience, for asking so many fantastic questions. This was a really fun one, and I think it'll be valuable. It sounds like it was valuable to you folks who were in the chat, and I think it'll be a valuable resource to have up on YouTube. So